The rain has held off till later. We certainly need it and we want it, but it looks as though the day is going to be a great day, and certainly I welcome you here to our research facility. So for those who don't know me, I'm James Hills. I'm the leader of the Livestock Production Centre, and I'll be emceeing today, so you'll see me a little bit throughout the day. Now, before I talk about the details of the day, I'm going to actually ask Mike, my boss. He's going to come up and he's going to welcome everyone and give some words. Thanks, Mike.
Good morning and welcome to the Tia Elliott Dairy Research Facility Field Day. It's great to see so many people here of all walks of life within the ag industry. I realise we've got farmers and other industry folk and some government folk and other researchers here as well. It's really great to see so many people here today, and thank you for coming. Practical field days are a great opportunity to see stuff close at hand and to be able to ask those questions and really engage with what's happening, and obviously we're going to talk a lot about what's happening on this farm. They're also an opportunity to network as well, for us to engage with each other and to learn from each other, and certainly we, TIA, are looking to learn from you, our industry, through the course of today too. So today is going to be grounded very largely on what is happening on this farm and the challenges that we are facing as an industry. We'll start with an overview of the Dairy Research Facility and the work underway to achieve high pasture production and high cow performance. Then we'll have a session on irrigation on this farm, and then we'll look at our work to reduce reliance on synthetic nitrogen while still maintaining productivity, the Dairy High 2 farmlet trial. And then a little bit later, we'll look at dairy benchmarking, and then something on virtual fencing, and then drought-resilient pastures. We'll look at natural capital accounting, and then there'll be a panel discussion and lunch, and then there'll be a farm walk. The farm walk, of course, is where the rubber hits the road, and you really get to engage with what's going on, and there's a real opportunity to ask about what you're seeing. We've chosen these topics. In fact, that's the research that we do on this farm because they are the challenges that are facing us as an industry. In terms of the climate, variability in our climate is increasing here in Tasmania and elsewhere in the world. When seasons get harder, average management no longer cuts the mustard. Resilience is about having more tools in the toolkit, more things that you can draw upon that enable you to get through the higher levels and troughs of variability. And that makes irrigation strategy, pasture persistence, and feed-based planning even more important than they've ever been. Another challenge is that we've got to maintain margins. And cost and availability of fertiliser and energy and labour and feed is becoming more expensive relatively, and so therefore these are no longer a line item, they're a strategic issue, and we've really got to look at our use of these things and make it as efficient as we possibly can in order to maintain those margins. Then we've got to think about the expectations of the market. This is not simply about compliance, but compliance is important, but it's our markets are increasingly wanting proof of our environmental stewardship, that we are lowering emissions, that we have good animal welfare, that we're sustainably managing the land and the water, and that's where things like natural capital accounting and credible benchmarking are heading. Trust me is no longer good enough. It's got to be a case of show me, and that is the world in which we're heading. And then finally, tools like virtual fencing and sensors and decision support systems aren't science fiction anymore. They're no longer gadgets, they're no longer toys for boys. They are practical things that will enable you to manage your farm in a more efficient way and manage to maintain margins too. The farms that gain the most will be the ones that adopt the technology with a clear purpose. And just to kind of concentrate minds here, if you remember Kodak as a company, I'll say two things. Firstly, you're probably over the age of 40. And secondly, there is an example of a company that didn't acknowledge its market, it didn't see where the market was going, and eventually it disappeared into virtually nothing. And this is my main key point, that none of these challenges that I've talked about can be addressed by just hoping. They require evidence and learning and adaptation and planning. And that is what research is for. That is what TIER does. Research isn't something that is done at the top of an ivory tower. At its best, research is a form of risk management. For the future, it helps us to answer the questions that I've just talked about. And so TIER's mandate is to sit in that space between challenge and opportunity to help make Tasmanian agriculture and the dairy industry and the livestock industry move forward with confidence. And of course we do that through partnering with farmers, partnering with industry groups, partnering with processors and government and other researchers across Australia and internationally. Certainly, where we try to ground our research is in keeping an eye on the importance of productivity and profitability and sustainability and practicality. And that only creates value when that research is shared. And that's why days like today are so important. Your questions, your skepticism, your feedback is essential, and I would encourage you to do that during the course of today. So I'm going to round off now because I was threatened with, at the Oscars, they turn the music ever louder and drown out the person giving the speech if they go on for too long. I was threatened with that a bit earlier. But for today, I would ask that you do three things. That you're curious, that you ask, if you have a question, that you ask. That you're candid, that you say what you're thinking, and that exchange and that feedback from industry is what drives us and keeps us honest and keeps us on the right path. And be connected as well. Use the breaks to connect with each other and to network. And so, on behalf of the Tasmanian Institute of Agriculture and the University of Tasmania, thank you again for being here. We're proud to host you here at Elliott, and we're even prouder that the work here is shaped by our industry and is for our industry. I hope you leave today with a few practical ideas and a few new connections and a renewed sense of that future. That future, even though it has challenges, it is also full of opportunity. And frankly, agriculture in Tasmania has never been as thriving as it is today, I don't think. So I hope you have a terrific day, and I look forward to seeing you out on the farm walk later. Thank you.
And the first speakers that are going to come up today are Andrew Marshall and Pieter Raedts. So Andrew is our farm manager, and Pieter is one of our researchers here, and they're going to give us an overview of the production, both from a pasture point of view and from a cow point of view here on the farm. And so we certainly invite them to come up.
Thank you, James. Just want to back everything else up that everyone said, and welcome to the farm. I hope you get something out of today, and don't be afraid to hunt us down and ask any questions. We'll be here all day. So on the screen, we've got our farm map here. As you can see through the centre, the blue dots are our dams. So we've got 5 dams here for our irrigation. We've got 220 hectares, which is in all the paddocks that you can see drawn up on the map. You can see our black circle there with the pivot on it. And then there's a 40 hectare block in the top corner that doesn't have fences on it. That is our lease block. So we have our runoff dry cows, R1s, R2s over there, and we make some hay over there as well. We've got about 180 megalitres of water that we use out of those 5 dams that are down through the centre. We've got the farmlet paddocks there that you can see in the red lines. I'll go through the irrigation there in a bit, and then our pivot, and then we've got travelling irrigation as well. Just with the cows at the moment, we're sitting just under 1.9 solids a day. That's our 7-day average. We've had a reasonably good season. It was another weird one, a bit cold at the start, and then tap turned off about Christmas time, and it's been flat out irrigating since. We actually had pretty good growing conditions for our main herd, and the farmlets were struggling a little bit early on, but Pieter will go through that later. So with those good growth rates, we made about 900 bales of silage and 400 bales of hay. So we were pretty happy with that. We had 3 or 4 cuts over the year, and we've got quite a surplus. So hopefully we can have an autumn break this year, and that'll certainly get us through pretty well. So following on from our irrigation, we'd love to be fully irrigated, but we just don't have the water for that. So as you can see on this map here, all the green areas are the bits that are fully irrigated and growing really well. You can see the farmlets steal all our water, which we fight over every year. But they are also, part of that trial is that it's fully irrigated, so we need to manage it to make sure we have enough water to irrigate that right through the season. You can see over where the pivot is, we're kind of irrigating a half circle at the moment, just as we're starting to get a bit low on water. So we try and fully irrigate that half circle to at least keep some green grass in the cow's diet, and then supplement with silage. The areas around where we are now, you can kind of see the green strips where we've been running travellers and hard hoses to try and keep some pasture production there as well. But you can really see the contrast with the dark red areas showing just how dry it is. For this, since Christmas, we've had about 15 mil of rain, and 10 of that was last week, so it's been quite a tough little period. Overall, we've got about 80 hectares of irrigation. So there's 30 hectares in the farmlets, which is fixed irrigation, which is controlled by the phone with an automatic system. And on top of that, we have 25 hectares on the pivot. The dairy used to be on the other side of the farm, so the pivot's in quite a good location for that, but unfortunately it's the furthest point from the dairy for us, which is why we don't fully irrigate the whole circle over there. We'd much prefer to keep it closer to the dairy. So yeah, 80 hectares, we've got 25 hectares in the pivot, and then about 25 hectares that we run with the travellers and hard hose. That 25 hectares can also be irrigated with our effluent, so we've just put in a new, finished the system with that, so we can effluent on all of those paddocks. So we try and follow the cows with our effluent, use it as a bit of a fertiliser, and a bit of irrigation at this time of the year as well. So we also have halter on the farm here. Megan will go through some of her research that she's been doing with that, but this is our halter map. You can see all of the different coloured dots, and on the right hand side of the screen is all our different mobs that we have. As you can see, there's quite a few. We've got a main herd, we've got our R2s on there as well, so they're running in our on the back of the pivot where we're not irrigating. And then we've got our 4 farmlet herds, and we also have a trial running at the moment with a separate mob of heifer first calving cows. That's on a green feed unit, so that's part of Richard's methane work as well. So as you can see, they're kind of scattered all around the farm. This was last week. Makes milking quite challenging. We've got 5 to 6 mobs to deal with during milking each day. So just a bit more on milking. 350 cows we average through the season. We calve about 375 and then obviously get down to 350 as an average. We're milking in a 50 bale rotary, and we're milking twice a day through the whole year, through the whole season. Part of that is for our research trials, keeping consistency, and also increasing our production as well out of our cows and keeping that up. Halter also has the pasture stuff on it as well, so you can see the different shades of colours on the map is basically our pasture cover. As you can see, most of our cover is in the irrigated paddocks, the rest of it is pretty much just dry standing hay at the moment. I will hand over to Peter now, and he will go through a few of our production things, and then I'll come back a bit later about a few others.
We'll try and keep an eye out on time. One of the things that has happened, and Andrew was already talking about that there have been some changes with the new irrigation for the farmlet trial. Here you see in the grey line at the top what the change in body weight has been over the last 10 years. The bottom line shows what the average cows are and what the peak number cows are to show what the evolution has been over time. And as you can see, in 2018, we actually noticed that our farmlets, that our farm herd did not have a third Frisian in it, which at that point was our aim. So they were being brought in. That has slowly over time increased the body weight a bit. So it's a third Frisian, the rest is cross cows. We are aiming for the future to have half of these cross as a true Kiwi, and we're working on that Kiwi cross. So you do see these changes. What you also see is from 21-22 onwards that the cow numbers have increased, and that is thanks to increase of irrigation water and increased productivity of our pastures. If you look at what over that time also happened with our cows is a change in peak cow production. Our aim here is still to produce as much as possible milk from homegrown feed. That does depend, in our case, also on the seasons. Dry years are more of a challenge, but try and use our water as efficient as possible and have the soil fertility decent is part of this. Peak production is more a consequence of cow management, and there have been a lot of changes over time. In the past, it was a low input system where people were happy with having about 380 or so milk solids out of a cow a year. That was slowly changed in a way that cows' early lactation were managed different, so that their appetite increased because of a higher milk yield, so that you can get more grass in them and still have that 70% or so homegrown if you can achieve that. If you look then at what the amount of milk solids per cow sold is, that also depends on how you look at it. KPIs have a purpose, and the industry quite often uses as a KPI the milk solids sold per peak cow. For a farm profitability assessment, that could be a good assessment. If you then, however, want to look at how the system is managed and how the components are managed, you also have to take into account milk fed to calves, which is a lot here because there's no bobby calves here, so a lot of calves are being fed milk for a long time. And you should actually look at the average cows on your farm, not the peak cow, if you want to see how systems are being managed, and you see evolution. One thing is very interesting to see. One of the changes made in the past was also focusing on improving diet. You see the dip in 21-22, peak production wasn't different. That was the year when Dam 3 was upgraded and the farm couldn't irrigate because of the upgrading works that were happening. The diet over summer was much poorer for the cows, and therefore they dropped in milk quicker. They adjusted their milk yield for where they were at. So this is where we are at the moment with cows. You can also look at that per kilo body weight because that increased over time. And as you can see, the blue line is the sold. If I would add milk to calves, our cows do about 1 kilo per kilo body weight from peak milk. But if you look at the mean cows, you see that they are actually performing quite well as a measure. Changes. Transition management was the key where we made changes, and that is focusing on that front part around calving, making sure the rumen is adapted, and that you have strategies for milk fever. So we do that with a lead feed. In the past, when you saw that change from that lower peak milk to a higher, the managers here at that point in time brought these changes in. They improved. They don't do anything special. They just try to do everything as good as possible. They improved that transition management, preventative actions, so that you don't really have any issues with milk fever. The cows have a good appetite, and there is one thing that we might do a little bit different to other farms. On the day of calving, they do not get the full amount of concentrate that they get in early lactation. We ramp up over 2 weeks because we have individual cow recognition and feeding in the dairy. That's probably the only thing that we have. What we, for the rest, have done is look at diet as much as possible. Small things are also important. If you look at this graph, the time between milkings is not 12 hours, 12 hours. It's quite often 14 and 8 or something like that, or 10, or 14 and a half and 10. And as long as your cows are doing a lot of milk, there's actually a lot of difference in the amount of milk produced since the last milking, and you correct that to 24 hours. And Andrew and the manager before him have increased the evenness of these hours, especially in peak lactation. So these small steps do make a difference in what you achieve. There's never enough time to go in a lot of details. The pasture production improved a lot because of much better irrigation and soil fertility, especially on the farmlet trials, but that is going to be spoken about a bit more in later presentations.
There's a couple of things I forgot to mention around our calves. So we're obviously calving 375, and we try to sell as many as we can at 4 days old so that we don't have to put our milk into them. For us, that's about 100. Which leaves us about 150 dairy beef that we will carry right through to weaning. So when we're feeding them, we aim for 100 kilos or 12 weeks, whatever gets reached first, is at our weaning point. Especially for beef, we like to be a little bit heavier because they're normally born a bit bigger, so they're not as well developed when they actually get to that 100 kilos. On top of that, we have 120 R1s that we normally feed milk right through as well, and we use the same threshold for them. Our Jersey crosses, we probably go to 90 kilos rather than 100 kilos, but we like to give them a bit more milk because when we get to this time of year, we know they're going to be struggling on a bit of dry feed. So we'd certainly try and fatten them up with the milk. Half the time the milk would go down the drain. The other half is milk out of the vat. So we see that as a balance, and we try and market a good beef calf. We're also using sex semen, so we try and limit our Frisian bulls, and that's just a simple way for us to maximise our dairy semen. So yeah, like Peter said, sex semen, 7-week joining period just to try and drive that fertility and select a bit harder on it as well. We also keep all the R1s on farm. We don't adjust anything off, so that's what our lease block is for.
Right, so I'm going to introduce myself. I'm the next speaker. So you already know who I am, James Hills. And what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about the irrigation on this farm, and we'll talk a little bit about, I think, one of the key reasons that the pasture production on this farm has been so successful under irrigation. I believe as an industry, when it comes to irrigating, we often cut corners, and it has a big impact on our production. So I'm going to start by going through some very basic 101s very, very quickly. Irrigation scheduling, I believe it is so essential to our pasture-based farming systems. And there are 3 basic things we need to know, and I'm pretty sure everybody here already knows this, but we need to know how much our soils hold. So the readily available water, the water that is able to be used by the pasture to grow effectively. So that'll change depending on the soil type. How big is our bucket, in other words? The second thing we need to know is how much is disappearing every day. So it's a pretty simple equation. We've got a certain bucket that's full of water at field capacity, how much is disappearing every day, and then how much do we put in, or can we put in with our irrigation system to replace that that's the system capacity. So 3 things that we need to know. If we think about some of our typical soils around here, this is some of the work we did about 7 or 8 years ago. For a typical clay loam, like South Rona down the bottom there, we have about 25 millimetres of available water within our root zone. So that's about how much is available. Luke McNabb's here today, he's got a very weird farm in terms of the soils, and he can hold up to 40 mils. It's quite a sandy soil, but it's got quite a bit of peat and other things within it, so it actually operates quite differently. So you might assume a particular result, but it might not necessarily be. And that has an impact on how you water and how the scheduling occurs. So here on this farm, it's about 25 mils is about what our available water is. Evapotranspiration here in Tassie, typically we max out at about 6 millimetres a day. It disappears from our system. This is Deloraine, but pretty similar up here. 5 to 6 mils is pretty typical at the peak. At the moment, I think we're somewhere around 4 to 5 mils that we lose in evapotranspiration in a day. And then system capacity is what is your capability of replacing that water that is disappearing in the day. So this is an example of a sprinkler nozzle chart for a pivot, and they can put 7.2 millimetres on in 24 hours. So their capacity is 7.2 millimetres. So if you think about 6 millimetres disappearing every day, they've got enough to be able to replace that every day and a little bit in surplus if you get behind, but not much, so there's not much room for error. The system capacity of our solid set system here on our farmlets is probably around 12 to 13 mils, so we actually have plenty of capacity to be able to catch up if we get behind in this particular farm. So putting it all together, and I've shown this before, but just an irrigation scenario, we've got about 24 mils available in our bucket. We have 6.5 mils disappearing every day at the peak of the season. If our system capacity is 6.5 mils, and there's quite a lot of pivots out there that have a capacity of around 6.5 mils that they can put in a 24-hour period. If we watered every third day, what happens when we start full? So 0 is the bucket's full. As we use that water, over 2 days, we're losing 12 mils or thereabouts. We then turn our pivot on, and 6.5 mils goes out, 6.5 mils goes in, so it flatlines. We then don't water for a couple of days again, and then we turn it on again. What happens at that point? You're right down there, the bucket is empty. And you know what? You panic, you turn your irrigator on and you keep it running flat out and there's no rain. What happens? You don't fill the bucket. You're only replacing what's going out, and so your pastures are not going to grow. And that is the typical green drought scenario. You get behind, you're going to have a problem. So you need to know how big your bucket is. You need to know how much is disappearing, and you need to know how much you can put back in to be able to schedule effectively to keep that water in the what we call the readily available zone, so it doesn't empty that bucket. So that's the basics of irrigation. So this is our farm, and this is an EM map where you've got, I'm not sure whether you can see the pointer there, but in the middle there is where we're going to go out afterwards and do some, at the field walks, some examples of what's going on. But this is the area that we're mainly irrigating on our farm. We've done some work out here on these paddocks, just out here on our farmlets, where we've tested some irrigation treatments. So we've done a trial where we've fully irrigated at about 12.5 mil deficit, so we've emptied the bucket halfway, and then we've refilled it again, and we've emptied it and refilled it. We've done where we've emptied it right to the bottom and refilled it. We've done it where we've emptied it at the bottom and then just left it down there. And then we've obviously had some treatments around no irrigation over a number of seasons. And just to demonstrate to you what this looks like, so here's an example of our bucket between the yellow and the red line is about 24 mils, and the green line is where we're irrigating down and the deficit's dropping and then going back up, so it's only half emptying the bucket. And what we've got is an example of what's happening during that period where we were just doing the half emptying of the bucket. This is a soil moisture probe that shows that that's exactly what was happening. We were filling it right up to field capacity where we get that steep point, and the blue line is a 10 centimetre, then we've got 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, so that's the soil moisture that is measured right down to 80 centimetres with our soil moisture probes. So we're getting soil moisture running right down to, nearly down to 70 odd centimetres in this particular example here. And what are we growing? We're growing about 80 odd kilos in March. So we're actually doing pretty well in terms of our dry matter production. If you then look at, say, a 30 mil deficit with only 12 mils of irrigation, so you've dropped it down, then you're only just putting a little bit at a time. During that period, well, you can certainly see that the blue line is not reaching that little point. We're not refilling it properly from the soil moisture probe, and we're certainly not seeing moisture go down to the bottom, and we're only getting 60 odd kilos under that short period of time. So we're certainly dropping in our production quite significantly, even though we're irrigating during that period of time. On the dryland section that was left dry for a period, certainly you can start to see the effects of that. Again, it was only over a short period, and while that production's pretty high still, it was significantly reduced from what we were achieving when we were fully irrigating. So our irrigation strategy for our farm and our farmlet is to fully irrigate. So on our farmlet here, if we look at our 30 odd hectares of those smaller 1 hectare paddocks, we used last year on those farmlets 6.1 megs per hectare. Now you'll go and say, why? That's pretty high. Most people would only put on 4 to 4.5 megs in this particular area. We grew 20 tonnes of dry matter, and assuming about 8 tonnes grown on our dry land, that means that we have grown about 12 tonnes as a result of our irrigation, which means that we have achieved about 2 tonnes of dry matter per megalitre, which is extremely efficient because typically the industry is around 1 to 1.2 tonnes of dry matter. So if you irrigate fully and you grow your dry matter, then you are more efficient even though you have used 6 megalitres per hectare. This year we've had a similar usage between 25 and 26, and if you think about the evapotranspiration, just the ET0, over the period from when we started irrigating till now, it's been about 275 millimetres of evapotranspiration. We've irrigated to date on our farmlets an average of about 341. Now you go and say, wait a minute, you're wasting a whole heap of water there. The effective irrigation is probably more like about 300 because you've got a loss within the system. We're putting on 11 mils per application and we've done 31 applications. But if you actually go out there and have a look at what is going on, the catch can results, so we put catch cans out there to have a look at what our variability is in our irrigation under our system, and we have a range from about 8 millimetres through to about 13 millimetres, typically across that area, which is around 248 through to about 403 millimetres on that site. So there are areas of our paddocks that are closer to what is the amount of ET that's occurring, or a little bit less, and then we've got some that are being, in a sense, over-irrigated. But what we do is, to fully irrigate, is we aim to irrigate for what is most limiting. And that's why we've got more in our system. But what it means is that we're getting production, good production, right across the whole area. So I just want to point that out. Often we end up irrigating to an average. Averages are not enough. We need to make sure that if we want proper production, we've got to be doing the right job. And so you can certainly see here we're irrigating down to about 40 centimetres, so 10, 20, 30, 40 on this graph. We're not really irrigating at that 50, 60 centimetres. We're not affecting that. So we're not wasting a heap of water because most of the roots are in about that top 40 centimetres anyway. So even though we're irrigating at that full irrigation level, we're not necessarily wasting that water. But just honing in, and I better keep an eye on the time because I'm not a timekeeper here. It has started. Just compare the impact of watering every 2 or 3 days in late January. I want to show you how sensitive it is. So on this graph here in paddock 17, we had evapotranspiration of 36 millimetres and we irrigated about 44 millimetres in that period, and we were watering every 2 days, and you can certainly see that this soil moisture is holding in the bucket. We then changed to every 3 days, 11 mils. And the ET was about 57 millimetres and the irrigation was about 55. And we started to draw the moisture down, right down to about 40 or 50 centimetres. So we were emptying the bucket, even though we were irrigating what was according to ET, okay, on the average numbers. We then changed again to every second day, ET of 45 mils, and then irrigation was 66. So we're putting in more, and you can certainly see 10, 20 and 30, we were increasing the amount of water in that bucket again. So we were improving that situation. We then changed again to every 3 days. What happened? Immediately we saw that we were starting to mine that water within that. It's very, very sensitive. And if you get it wrong, even by a few mils, it can have a major impact. And I've nearly run out of time. We've got some more of this that we want to discuss in the field, plus some details around some of our other irrigation projects. I've got all those details. So if you want to stick around afterwards, Marek is going to join us and we're going to go out and we're going to talk a little bit about some of the issues around soil moisture. I was going to get Marek to come up here and talk about this now, but we're kind of out of time. So Marek will come out into the field and we'll be able to talk about this because we're going out to paddocks 16 and 17, and these are the two probes that are in those two paddocks, and those probes are only about 10 or 15 metres apart. One in one paddock, one in another. And yet look at the difference in terms of the soil moisture, and there's some really, really important lessons that we need to learn from that in relation to what's happening there and the impact that that can have on your production.
Yeah, so Peter and I are going to talk about the High 2 farmlet trial, which is now in its third year of 3. My name's Zac. I joined the TIA livestock team about a year ago, and my expertise is really in the plant and soil space, and so I'll talk about that component of our current trial for about 10 minutes and then pass to Peter to talk more about the animal production. Okay, so the High 2 trial began in 2023, and we have 4 independently managed herds of cows. There's 29 cows in farmlet 1, 2 and 3, and 22, so a lower stocking rate in 4. And the table shows the treatments. So we're simultaneously reducing nitrogen and increasing species composition in these treatments. So we range from farmlet 1 with what is effectively what we model to be non-limiting nitrogen for a perennial ryegrass, white clover pasture. 2 and 3 are intermediate nitrogen with obviously half of 300. They differ due to the presence of plantain in farmlet 3, or the sown composition anyway. And then farmlet 4 is a diverse mixture of species with zero nitrogen. So I'm going to start talking a little bit about the pasture production across the 3 seasons. So yeah, we're in a position now 2.5 out of 3 years of the trial to see actually where this is headed. So the first season was, everything was going really gangbusters, huge production, especially during the period of surplus. And we reached the break-even point, which in our system is about 75 kilograms. That's how much the animals need that's the pasture growth rate needed to satisfy the animal demand in these systems. So we reached that break-even very early in the first season and quite early in the second season, perhaps October. But this season's been challenging in that break-even didn't really occur until mid to late November. And with regards to the treatments, so you can see farmlet 1 and 2 have actually maintained very similar production throughout. Farmlet 4 and to a lesser extent farmlet 3 have dropped a little bit from the others in this final year, especially in the case of farmlet 4 during the colder months and through early spring. And this is the same data but presented on a cumulative basis. So showing just up until January each of our 3 seasons, where we are basically currently at in terms of cumulative production across the 3 years. And so we asked Karen, who's our resident expert biophysical modeller of pasture production, to help us figure out what the limiting factor might have been this year for total production. And certainly when you run the simulations, the potential production was significantly down this season, and that's to a large extent a function of low soil temperatures, much lower than averages for this site. And I wanted to raise the soil temperature issue because coming back to pasture production, we have our farmlet 2 system with half synthetic nitrogen performing as well as a full nitrogen system after 2.5 years, and that's despite very challenging conditions, low temperatures, for biological nitrogen supply. Obviously things like mineralisation of organic matter and infixation are temperature dependent, but evidently there's still enough of it going on in our farmlet 2 to support basically full production despite the cooler year. Species composition of the pastures has changed over time. There's been a trend towards perennial ryegrass dominance in all 3, but especially so in farmlet 1 with full nitrogen. Clover has probably declined from about 40% down to 25% across the 3 years. It shows that strong seasonality, peaking in summer. Obviously we're not necessarily at peak clover right now, but we're probably getting into that stage. And yeah, there's a divergence in clover composition between the farmlets at this point. So you'll see this when we walk out in the paddocks, that farmlet 4 has got a huge amount of clover, less so in 2 and certainly less so in 1. Plantain dropped out of our system quite quickly. Within the first year, it was down to well below 10%. And in farmlet 4, the other major component is the cocksfoot. That increased during the first 2 years, but doesn't contribute to milk production because the cows ignore it. We're tightening up our estimates of clover end fixation. So this is just a bit of technical detail. We make use of the fact the soil has more of the heavy isotope of nitrogen, and we calculate from the difference between the grass nitrogen isotopes and the clover N isotopes how much nitrogen in the clover is fixed rather than derived from the soil. And from that we can multiply by clover biomass to get N fixed per hectare. And at the moment we have that for the first year of the trial. So this shows that's the coloured rows right down the end. And yeah, well, I think I would say these are conservative estimates, probably fixed 300 kilograms of nitrogen in farmlet 4 during the first year of the trial, which is high. I've highlighted that red column because there is one component of clover fixation which we don't know a lot about, which is how much the plant brings in, which we don't capture with our cuts to about toe height. And so if anyone wants to do a really challenging PhD and help us improve that number, get in touch, because that's a kind of a black box for end fixation. We have a little bit of selective grazing in the paddocks because we have some quite large clumps of clover, and so yeah, small scale spatial separation, which allows some dietary selection by the cows. They only need about 20 centimetres or so in order to select their preferred species. And so there's a fair chance that in farmlet 4 they are selecting a high clover, low fibre diet. And so that's relevant because we haven't seen major differences between the treatments in terms of milk production or the feed conversion efficiency. A challenge for systems reliant on biological fixation is the variation that develops over time in actual achieved end fixation. So I've put a slide here showing just 5 randomly selected farmlet 2 paddocks showing that the clover composition has diverged quite a lot within that treatment. And so the challenge going ahead, if we were to manage this for 5 more years, is how to respond to that, how to bring clover back up, how to facilitate higher biological end supply, and then how to, hopefully how to use synthetic N tactically in and around the pre-existing biological nitrogen.
Okay, I'm going to speak a little bit about cow production. And if you look at cow production, Zac already alluded that individual cow production, or let's call it just in general cow production, there's not really that much difference between the farmlets. What Zac has been gathering data-wise is that pre and post grazing what is left in the paddock, and you do see that cows preferentially graze certain species, especially in farmlet 4. Farmlet 4 has a much more diverse species mix. The grasses in there, some of them are not the best ones, which is perennial ryegrass, so you bring in a poorer quality. The cows correct for that to graze more clover, which is much more easily digestible. And that is also reflected in the milk urea nitrogen concentration. That is what the cows eat in paddocks, and the milk urea nitrogen or MUN concentration is then a reflection of the amount of nitrogen not used or protein not used. And there's not really a difference between the farmlets. Farmlet 4 sits at the same level as all the others, whilst there's no synthetic nitrogen going into that system. But keep in mind that these cows preferentially graze a fair bit of clover. So what the cows eat is not really any difference. So I'm mostly going to speak about what all cows do, not the difference between treatments, because at the cow level it's actually not really happening. And you see that here. Ultimately, what you thrive on your farm is selling milk solids per hectare, preferably by at least 70% homegrown, which we actually in the first 2 years achieved. This year it's our bait and see. It was very cold, so we grew a little bit less in the first half, but the numbers will come out over the wash. This is the 3 years, running over the same amount of time. In the first year, we pulled out the cows a little bit earlier when we had grazed everything down. The second year, they were milked until almost mid-June, the last cows in it. But they are fairly high levels, 2,400 per hectare at the farms that have full stocking rate. The only difference ultimately is stocking rate. If you look at the per hectare, farmlet 4 has less cows because of zero nitrogen. Everybody expects to grow less, which we are starting to see now clearly in year 2 and 3. If I look at this only for the farmlet 1, 2, and 3 cows, because this is still talking about solids per hectare, you do see differences between years. That's extremely important that these kind of trials, if you look at a system level, run over multiple years. The green line is the middle year, so was last year. It was a very wet start of the season, brief, so wet that we had to pull them off a week. And then, of course, we can't do on-off grazing on our paddocks in a main herd. In a normal situation, we would have done that. We had to do that in a different way. But you see, it just shows a similar line. It really depends on the conditions of the year where you end up and how long you can milk on them. So that's where we are at. If you look at individual, so the average cow production, you see something similar. The left graph shows this year the difference between farms basically the same. You see that dip in October. That is when we had this year a very long period of wet weather, not wet enough so that we had to pull them off. There was bugging damage, but we could keep them on, but the cows just couldn't eat. They dropped their milk. They couldn't fully eat. Whatever you did, there was just basic pasture. And in the right graph, you see the average of all farmlet cows over the 3 years. So this is what you get if you have a highly productive, fully irrigated system that provides good quality grass to your cows all year round. Ours eat about 17 kilos most of the year until they later in lactation. If we have that amount of grass available, and you see that they can have a fairly good production over time if you can provide that quality and quantity. What we do have, however, is at the start of the season a feed gap. We do have to quite often fill a little bit of silage, and we have to do that at the end, and that's what you see here. Grazing time and rumination time, minutes per cow per day, both in the center of these graphs sit what I see in most conditions as the maximum time that cows are willing to spend on eating. Before and after, these drops are more because of feeding silage, which is much more efficient. Body weight changes, there's impact on that too. You see fluctuations on the left side. What you can see, body weight nadir is around when we start them on the farmlets. That's about 3 weeks after calving. That's when they already start filling up, feeding well, getting good gut fill. The body condition nadir, the lowest point is more like 80 days after calving. Mating starts at the 25th of October or so, and that's the date you see over there. From then onwards, you see that the diet is okay for them. So you see that the production that we have in the cows is okay, sustainable in as far as we can see in the cows, and on itself doing well if you can provide that good quality grass over a long period of time.
Thank you. Now we give them a round of applause.
Firstly, I'd just like to acknowledge the farmer participants and genuinely thank them for their participation and their input. Without them, we don't have a project. I think it's vitally important to industry, which I will outline. And also a big shout out to Donna Avery. So I collaborated for the first year with Fonterra to collect some of the data sets, and she introduced some new farms. So thanks very much, Donna, and thanks to Fonterra. Firstly, the Dairy Farm Monitor Project. It's a benchmark project run by Dairy Australia to collect and analyse the physical and financial data of 250 dairy farms across the country. So those farms, they represent a range of locations from farm systems, farm size and herd size. The program provides high quality data for farmers to measure and compare their own farm data sets and their performance and identify areas for improvement. It's also important as a decision-making tool for industry, for key stakeholders, Dairy Australia and government. Now, for the 24-25 Dairy Farm Monitor report, where are we going here? I'll just highlight that there's two parts to this, the physical KPIs and the financial KPIs, but firstly, just a bit of an overview. We were a bit down on numbers this last season, so we had 24 data sets. Normally you have around 30. Those 24 were replaced by about 8 new farms. Some of those were leased farms, which is a bit different criteria for what we're normally used to. Of those 24 farms, the average herd size was 813 cows, compared to the Tasmanian average of 519. So you've just got to put it into context. In terms of those 24 farms, the average was 813, but for Tasmania, the average herd size is 519. Just in terms of the season, if you can remember back, rainfall was about 100 mil below average. So average rainfall was about 1,003 mil. The rainfall for the 24-25 was 900, but it's not so much about how much rain we got, it's when it fell, and that affected the season. And if you can see, are the graphs up? If you can see those graphs, early winter, spring was looking okay, but the autumn failed miserably, and that did affect. That affected some of the numbers in the data set. And you can just see the spread of farms, mainly from the north, northwest to the northeast. We need a few from the south. And I'd encourage anyone to participate in this project. It's well worthwhile. In terms of performance, I'm going to call it the 7 to 8% year, because when I look at the values, and I've averaged some of the values, the increases and the decreases, it sort of works between 7 to 8%. And it's uncanny, and I'm no Alan Kohler, but if Alan Kohler was looking at this, he'd have some sort of message behind it. But, maybe it'll be on the news. But as you can see, one of the key drivers, which is average milk price, fell from $9.26 to $8.59, 7% decrease. If you go down to variable costs, interestingly, they also fell by 8%, which was from $4.83 to $4.44. Now that's positive, because we do want to see costs decrease, but they have to fall in the right places. And then in terms of some of those other changes, there was a massive change in employed labour costs, from $1.37 to $1.03. And I think I just want to highlight again that the values that you'll see in the report need to be put in context by the changing data set. So we had a number of new farms, and their physical and farm systems were a lot different to some of the farms that replaced them. You can see that EBIT, in terms of earnings before, or profit in terms of EBIT, earnings before interest and tax, also fell from, interestingly, by 8%, or coincidentally, from $2.34 to $2.16. The average is $2.35 over the last 11 years. And return on equity had an increase of 8%. How does that work? From 7.3 to 8.9. Total return on assets driven by profit, largely driven by the milk price, also fell from 6.2 to 5.2%. I've got to keep moving. So as I said, there's two parts to this. The physical key performance indicators, where we look at cows milked and production trends. We not only compare the 2 years from the 23-24 to the 24-25, but we also look at trends over time. In terms of those trends, while the graphs don't show huge changes, but over the last 11 years, cows milked has increased by 38%. Milk solids per hectare has increased by 38%, and milk solids per cow's increased. We've all seen an increase. Stocking rates probably increased by 10%. While it's not a large change, it just looks, the graph refers to those changes, and we can track those trends over time. In terms of homegrown feed is considered a key profit driver. We saw an increase in homegrown feed costs, which is made up of pasture and cropping, and it's gone from $1.37 down to $1.12. So there was a decrease in homegrown feed costs. But in terms of homegrown feed, pasture grazed increased from 10.2 in the 23-24 to 10.5 tonne, made up of 10 tonne of grazed pasture and 0.5 of conserved. So there's not a lot of change in the conserved pasture. There's also not a lot of change in the grazed feed, and I think it's something that the industry can have a look at. I'm not sure what's driving it. In terms of the percentage of homegrown feed, 62%, compared to the top 25 of 63% percentage of homegrown feed in the diet. The balance of that's made up of concentrates and purchased feeds, such as hay and silage coming into the system, and other feeds. You can see some of the trends there. And again, it just shows conserved feed, graze feed, where we've come from to where we are now. Not a lot of change from 9.4 tonne back in 13-14 to 10 tonne in 24-25. And in terms of nitrogen, nitrogen's always on the radar as a topic, whether we use too much or not enough, but there is some regulation in the system that we're aware of, and we've seen a decrease from 215 to 197 kilos of N per hectare. Coincidentally, it's nearly an 8% change. In terms of the financial key performance indicators, we measure cost of production made up of overhead and variable costs, and also milk income. So that's just those trend lines. You can see that milk price fell from $9.26 to $8.59, and the next graph shows the change over time. We've seen a 25% increase over the 11 years from $6.87 to $8.59. It's about a 2.27% change per year. And to put those numbers into context, I've just looked at the average inflation over time, and average inflation's been around 2.7%. For 24-25 it was 2.84%. So you can see how the costs are tracking. And whilst milk income's really important, and when we look at the farmer survey, milk income was ranked, I think, 90% as a key issue for most farms. And in terms of gross income, 94 to 96% of gross income is made up of milk income. Then we've got livestock income. Livestock income was lower in the 24-25 season, and then of course there's other income to make up of that. But these are some of the key financial performance indicators that we use and farmers can use to measure. In terms of the changes, cost of production's made up of variable costs, and you can see those changes across those cost centres. Herd costs, shed costs, homegrown feed costs, purchased feed and agistment is it makes up around 63% or above 60% of the variable feed costs, and impressively that came down for that year. The other part of it's overhead costs. We don't see a lot of change in overhead costs, but you can see those cost centres that are important in the overhead cost section are employed labour. Huge change in employed labour when we talk about labour costs increasing. But again, put it into context with the farms, those farms and the types of farms in the data set. Repairs and maintenance, all other overheads, and imputed labour. And then in terms of profit, we're just tracking here earnings before interest and tax, which is our measure of profit against the milk price, tends to track pretty closely with milk price over time. And then of course return on total assets managed against milk price. So probably not as consistent, but you can see there's been a decrease between 23-24 and 24-25. So look, that's a summary. It's a snapshot of where we have how the 24-25 season wrapped up. And in terms of that farmer confidence survey, 60% rated milk price as being the highest. And this is over the 5-year outlook, but that mirrors the 12-month outlook. Really close. So that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here. It's actually great to be back at another open day. It's become quickly my yearly virtual fencing update. But today is particularly exciting, not only because of all the changes we're seeing around Australia with virtual fencing legislation and how everyone is increasingly looking to the work that we're doing and the experience that our producers are having here as they consider adopting the technology themselves, but also as the technology has expanded from dairy into beef systems, so has the research. So today I'm going to talk about a project that we have in a beef system rather than what we have traditionally talked about, which is dairy. But I am focusing on maternal productivity, and I think there are things about the findings that I'll talk to you about that are applicable regardless of system. So we know what makes a good female beef cow. She needs to be able to get into calf early as a heifer for her first time, and by early we mean about 6 weeks. She needs to be able to calf unassisted, to raise that viable calf, and then to be able to get back in calf again pretty quickly within about 6 weeks. Animals that are able to do this are given the term WAPE, so it means wet and pregnant early. But a lot of animals aren't actually getting this term assigned to them. There was a really large research project that was conducted by Adelaide University and the Davies Livestock Research Centre. It was part of Jenna's PhD program, and that's Jenna up there with one of her pet cows. And it found that only about 56% of heifers were given this WAPE term. Jenna also showed that the biggest fallout was getting heifers in calf early that first time. So the key message from this research was that's the target area. We want to get as many heifers in calf early for their first joining. From the same research project, again part of Jenna's PhD, this is a chart showing the relationship between a heifer's joining rate and conception rate. So increasing the joining weight increases conception, but particularly targeting that 350 to 400 kilogram target, you should get conception rates of around 75 to 80%. How do we increase these weights? It's by improving growth, by increasing the plane of nutrition. So this isn't just the quality of pasture we feed them, but also how much we're getting into the animals. And that's the aim of the current project. We're trying to see how much we can improve reproductive performance of heifers and first calf cows, so these are those WAPE animals, by an increased utilisation of a higher quality feed base. Before we started this project, we did some modelling, which is what you can see on this chart. So that blue line on the bottom, that's real life data from a beef farm. These are heifer weights at different stages of the production cycle. We asked the question, what would their weights look like if we increase the quality of the pasture they were eating by 0.5 of a megajoule ME and increased how much they ate by half a tonne a hectare? That's the red line. And then we asked, well, what would happen if we, really pushed the system and got a whole megajoule ME in the pasture and we increased consumption by a tonne a hectare? And that's the green line. What you can see here, that's our 350 kilogram target. So for the farm that we used in this modelling scenario, it's that blue line, it's falling clearly below that 350 kilogram target to get good conception rates. The red is nudging it, the green is well above it. Now this project is being run with a large commercial partner from King Island. We're studying 2,000 Angus heifers and we're recruiting them at 10 months of age, studying them through to their second pregnancy confirmation. But we're only studying 1,000 animals at a time. So the research is going on for a number of years. Those 1,000 animals are being split into groups of 4. And the 4 groups are grazing different parts of the farm, which you can see there. So the blue group only rotationally grazes those blue paddocks, the pink group only pink, yellow group down the bottom there, and the green group to the west there. All these farmlets, they're the same size in terms of hectare, and they're balanced also for the quality of the pasture on offer. And in fact, before we started this trial, Rowan Smith and Emily Hall spent a lot of time over in King Island doing pasture assessments, quality assessments, and soil sampling. We ended up reseeding a couple of paddocks and doing some targeted fertiliser application as well. So by the time the project started, everyone was around about the same. Those orange dots you can see in each rotation, we selected 2 paddocks that had a higher feed-based quality and 2 that were maybe a bit more marginal, and we're doing some more intensive pasture observations on these paddocks throughout the study process. Now with our 4 groups, we're applying 2 treatments. So we have a group of 2 mobs of heifers that are being grazed intensively using the halter virtual fencing technology. These animals are being shipped twice per day. This is similar to what we would do in a dairy system. The other 2 groups are being grazed what we call conventionally. So they're being grazed, shifted twice a week using electric fences, which is how this farm would normally manage its animals. Throughout the animals' lives, we're taking measures of their live weight and body condition. We're doing scans to look at puberty attainment, reproduction, calving outcomes, and we're also doing those measures of pasture grown, offered, consumed, and quality on those paddocks from each rotation. Today I'm focusing on these reproduction outcomes for those first 1,000 heifers that we're looking at. So leading up to joining, we were scanning the heifers and we were looking for signs of ovulation in them. And that's because the animals that have started cycling before joining are more likely to become pregnant at joining. What you're seeing on here down the bottom is something that we call residual weight. So this is the animal's weight given her height. And we're using this because weight on its own doesn't really account for differences in, say, body shape or skeletal size. Residual weight does do that. We're also looking at the pubertal rate, which is going up and down this way. What this chart is showing is that the heifers that are heavier than expected were more likely to be pubertal at joining than heifers that were lighter than expected for their weight, for their height. Now, we did have some life history data for these animals too. So looking back, we found that the pubertal heifers, they were also heavier at marking and they were heavier at weaning. We know from previous data that calves that are born early in the season do tend to be heavier at weaning. So what I suspect is that we're seeing some generational impacts here. And that, I mean, if you get a heifer in calf within 6 weeks, her calf is then going to be born earlier in the season. That calf then has longer access to better quality spring lush pasture. She's going to be heavier at weaning, she's going to be heavier throughout her life and more likely to enter early puberty and then herself have a calf that's born earlier in the season. First cycle conception, so we have scanned the heifers for pregnancy conception, but this is only early conception. I don't have the full pregnancy test results yet because they're getting scanned in another 2 weeks. I'm going to go through these data, but before I do, I just really want the qualifier that this hasn't been analysed. It's really just the group means for our virtual fencing and control, and it's only that first 1,000 animals. So I wanted to present it to you because there are some interesting things that we can tease out of it, but you know, just take it with a grain of salt that the data set's not complete yet. What this is showing is that the animals in the virtual fencing and the control groups, they had similar weights at joining, but the virtual fencing ones gained more weight during the joining. They had a higher number of animals that were pubertal at joining, and while their growth advantage didn't persist over the joining process, they did end up with more animals conceiving to that first cycle. What I think this data is showing us is that the pre-joining growth is important for conception, probably more than the post-joining growth. And just on the side, the farm were absolutely stoked with this data because historically they were achieving about a 44% conception rate to the first cycle. So even our control animals and the conception that we got with them was a massive jump. So this, I think, shows the value in the improved pasture quality combined with what ended up to be a pretty good season on King Island after a rough start. But even with that, we got a higher conception in the virtual fence, and that to me demonstrates the value of increased utilisation of that improved feed base. Just because I have to bring it back to dairy, I can't help myself. I think that this is relevant still for our dairy systems. A lot of our animals are weaned into agistment or runoff blocks where there can be quite a variable pasture quality. Yes, we have targets for weights and body condition score, but I've really struggled to find any information on how many animals are reaching those weights and targets, what's the variability around that. So I wonder how we could potentially use these data to help also inform how we're rearing heifers in our dairy systems. Thank you.
Thanks very much, James. I want to talk to you a little bit about a project that we've been doing focused on increasing resilience in our pastures as we look forward to, I guess, a bit more variability in our rainfall and the way we manage our pastures going forward. So This was a project funded by the federal government through the Future Drought Fund, and it's being led by Deakin University in Victoria. And the idea of this project, or the one that was sort of hypothesised by Deakin at the time, was that if we increase the amount of diversity in the pasture species within a pasture, then that would hold it in good stead to be more resilient and ultimately long-term ride those bumps in the road and grow more feed. I guess when we think about diversifying the feed base, you can kind of think about it in two ways. We can either increase the amount of species within a paddock and make the pasture mix more complex, or we can grow different mixes across the feed base and still have a same level of diversity. So I guess there's two strategies there that I'm interested to have a look at. So I guess the aim there was to see whether we could evaluate these really species diverse mixes that have often come from a cover cropping sort of angle in a horticulture space, and whether or not those species can last together over time. With the idea that we're trying to, smooth our feed profile a little bit, and in particular provide a bit more summer feed in our dryland systems. So as I said, we're collaborating with Deakin out of Victoria, but we're also collaborating with SARDI in South Australia and DPIRD in WA, and there's high and low rainfall sites in each of those states. And across the majority of those of our trial sites, there's the same 3 or 4 mixes within each of those, so we can actually compare in different environments. There is also local pasture mixes that are sort of dedicated to those areas that we know would grow well. So for our sites, they're largely in the Midlands and Northeast in this project, in the sort of a low rainfall environment and a medium to high rainfall environment. These are significant areas for our beef and sheep enterprises, and we're trying to match our feed bases for that purpose. I'll give you a little bit more information probably on the Pipers River site and to a lesser extent the Midland site, but I'll start with the Pipers River site. So it's a medium to high rainfall site where majority of our pastures in that area are based on perennial ryegrass and a little bit of white clover. As you can see, there was fertility added. It was in October 2024 sown experiment, and as you can see, we're sort of 7 or 8 harvests in now, and a bit over, getting close to 18 months with it being in the ground. And we use sheep to graze the pasture after we take our harvest cuts. So that's what it looks like. As you can see there's a bit of you can see the variability there in the pasture species mixes. Talking about the mixes, there they are. So like I said, we sort of start off with a sort of a control pasture for that area, or a local control being perennial ryegrass and white clover. And as you can see, you start to add in different species, more grasses, more legumes, more herbs, up until some really complex mixes there. And then one there also with just perennial ryegrass on its own at a really high rate. So yeah, you can see how complex they get. There's a few options there where we're balancing the difference between perennial ryegrass and cocksfoot and switching the ratios around. So that there's a few there that look the same, but they were quite different in their sowing rates. Just to sort of give you an idea of what's happened in that Pipers River area, and pretty similar to what Symon was talking about with some of those other rainfalls. So 2024 was a great establishment year for us. We were able to get the pasture up and going and well established with good spring rains. Then followed that with a very poor autumn, which I think is widely experienced across the north of the state. And obviously very poor growth rates during that time. A decent spring, but like it was sort of mentioned before, it was quite a cool, mild spring, and production didn't really get cranking until sort of October, November. And then What's going to happen this year? Well, who knows? It's looking dry at the moment, and I think we're at least in for a reasonably dry autumn. So far at that location, the grass species of note, the perennial ryegrass has done very well during the winter and early spring months, and the cocksfoot has then taken over during summer, remembering that these are dryland pastures. The red and white clovers have done well. I mean, I've been really impressed with, in particular, the chicory taking over with its deep roots in the heat over summer. In the regenerative mixes or the more complex mixes that had other things like oats and annual ryegrass and tillage radish, etc., naturally the majority of those being quite annual, they really produced a lot of dry matter in that first sort of 3 to 4 months and then drop out of that system. At our Campbelltown site, it's very similar in the way it's set up, but use of more phalaris and cocksfoot there rather than ryegrass, a lot more lucerne in those mixes and annual legumes as well. That's those mixes there. Again, what we're seeing, the main grass species, phalaris, which we know in that area, has persisted well. It established far better than the other grasses. Lucerne has done really well, and chicory had done really well. So you can see how dry it is in the background. To have green feed there at that time of the year is pretty valuable. Those species and those mixes sort of shook out very quickly within the first 12 months. There's subterranean clover background there, but again, those other annual species only really lasted a year. So what we did was we identified those 3 or 4 species, and now we're varying the rates of phalaris, lucerne, and chicory, and also cocksfoot. So just mucking around with sowing rates to try and get the right balance of grass and grass, legume, and herb in those mixes. So there's a bit of a snapshot of what we've been up to, and I just acknowledge my team that works with me and does a lot of hard work in the field, in Emily, Bruce, and Anthony, done a great job so far. But that's a bit of a snapshot about what we're up to. We've got sites across Tasmania, and we hope to try and extend some of this knowledge that we're seeing in our focal sites by producers coming to them, identifying some of the pasture mixes that they think might be worth having a look at on their farm, and then taking and helping them get started in some of these more complex mixes. But I guess the big learning, I think, even in the year and a half of this data, is that to me, I don't think throwing an enormous amount of diversity into a pasture is necessarily that advantageous. I think using different mixes across different areas of the farm and having diversity across our feed base is probably going to be a better option to provide resilience. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name's Hannah Sadler. I grew up on a dairy farm in Flowerdale, and I can see my dad hiding in the back there. He promised he wouldn't come today because he knew how nervous I was about speaking. I'm really excited actually to be involved in doing a natural capital account here at the dairy, at the Tia Dairy Farm, and big thank you to James and Andrew Marshall for being so enthusiastic and supportive of the whole idea. So in a nutshell, it's working on this farm. So you've probably seen a few different maps of the farm today that have presented the production areas and bits and pieces. As you can see on this map here is mostly focusing on the vegetation, the existing vegetation, and also some vegetation areas, or some areas that we're planning on doing some new activities. So this is a demo, it's not research, it's having a crack at all of us trying to figure out what natural capital accounting is and how it might relate to dairy farmers and or farmers across the northwest Tassie. And the idea is to really practically demonstrate the process and the value of accounting for and actively considering on-farm natural values and ecosystem services on Tassie farms. So it's in partnership with TIA, and also we have Fonterra and Dairy Tas involved as supporters. So what is natural capital, or what are natural assets? So basically it's just a rebranding of our traditional natural resources such as soil, water and the living things on our farms so that they can be better recognised and valued in an economic sense. So natural capital actually represents a significant ecological and commercial value for farmers, and it's an opportunity for it to be accounted for alongside traditional agricultural assets like land, infrastructure and the livestock and stuff to make a more complete picture of a farm's assets. So, and the other thing is, like, this is a photo of my, I'm assuming you can see this, a photo of a tree on my sister's farm and with my kids climbing all over it and their cousins. So natural assets obviously also have a huge value for farmers for aesthetics and well-being and community well-being. And I think sometimes we forget about that, even though we all love it. So what are the drivers of interest in natural capital? So unfortunately, globally, nature is in decline because of pressure from human activities. So at the World Economic Forum in 2020, they presented that $44 trillion of economic value generation, or over half of the world's GDP, total value, is moderately or highly dependent on nature and its services, and as a result, it's exposed to risk from nature loss. So, you know, this is something we need to think about for managing our own business. So the world has been uniting in developing some consistent systems of measuring and accounting for nature with the aim to reverse this decline and sort of better incorporate it into our economic systems. So natural capital accounting allows businesses to report on and invest in nature. There are risks and opportunities associated with natural capital accounting. Obviously, farmers don't want to have to do more stuff like all these protocols and regulations and everything like that. But I'd like to think there's both, you know, there's maybe some processes that you're like, oh my God, this is too much work. But there are also a lot of benefits to better thinking about and managing your on-farm natural assets. So some Australian businesses are already voluntarily reporting on nature annually. You might have seen in the last couple of weeks that Foraco's just released their 5th natural capital account, the Tasmanian Forestry Company. So this is a mandatory requirement, but they've done it for access, for accountability and access to markets. So they've done it in a consistent way through these internationally recognised systems. And they also put a financial value on their accounts. Carbon accounting has become mandatory for a lot of businesses in Australia already, and potentially it might become mandatory to account for nature as well at a certain scale or to access key export markets. But there's also a lot of other co-values and reasons why you really want to protect nature on your farm. So, for example, productivity and resilience, shelter and shade for stock, improved pasture growth. Private Forest Tas has done some really awesome research on the production gains that you can get next to shelter belts. I think they got a 30% growth increase in the Midlands of Tassie next to shelter. You have pollination services. Vegetation around streams can improve, or does definitely improve, water quality and reduces evaporation. Some of the work from ANU has discovered, you know, that you get live weight gains in your stock from improved water quality. Obviously, we've got a lot of infrastructure, irrigation and dairy, cleaning stuff. We want to have good quality water. And if we're maintaining healthy creeks and waterways and dams, then that improves the water quality. And there are emerging and existing carbon and biodiversity credits now, which also can provide diverse income streams. And it obviously protects biodiversity and habitat on your farm, and it provides those scenic health and wellbeing values for both the farmers themselves and farm workers, but also the broader community. So, yeah, we're having this demonstration here at this farm to figure this all out together. So this is a learning experience for me. I was standing here 12 months ago with an idea of what this would be. That has changed. I've learnt a lot. I think we've all learned a lot already. And this project runs them through till June 2028. And I feel like we're going to learn a hell of a lot more over that period of time. The aim is to demystify what natural capital accounting is, demonstrate how it can be used by farmers and industry here in Northwest Tassie. We want to demonstrate and implement targeted actions on this farm that align with the Dairy Sustainability Framework and also Fonterra's aspirations as a supplier. We want to monitor those changes and track the improvements and the resilience benefits on this farm. We want to provide a practical model for farmers to better integrate and improve their management on their farms in their own operations. We want to identify some opportunities, market opportunities, such as the carbon and the biodiversity credits, to offer new revenue streams, diverse revenue streams for farmers. And we want to bring farmers and industry along. So no stupid questions here. As I said, I've asked some stupid questions. I've learned a lot of things. Probably would have done it a bit differently in some things as we've gone along. We're all learning here, and so I encourage stupid questions because maybe it'll, maybe this will help evolve this demonstration. So the idea is this practical, we're all learning together, finding out what this actually means and the opportunities for Northwest Tassie. So as it is, this kicked off this time last year, where we went around and we gathered data. We chose to gather data on the vegetation and the soils to create a baseline, and the vegetation was chosen basically. You could measure everything, but it would take a lot of time and a lot of money. Measuring the existing vegetation on the farm gives us an opportunity to think about the broader habitat and the waterways and stuff, and the broader implications as that. And it doesn't move. And also it offers a lot of practical opportunities for us to make some changes on the farm. When you have a walk around later, have a look at what vegetation exists on this farm, because it's actually really cool. And I know that, as think about your own farm, think about the farms that you go and visit around the place. There's some specky little spots on each of these properties. I've been genuinely surprised, and every time I come out here I discover something new, whether it might be some of the paddock trees that are just sort of scattered around the place. Some of them could do with a bit of help. And so we're thinking about opportunities to kind of improve the resilience of paddock trees. We're looking at the existing vegetation that we have on the farm, whether that's remnant, big chunks of huge eucalypts. When you head over this way down past the dairy, you'll see some really massive eucalypts and some nice wet gullies. They don't have very much weeds in them, so our idea is that we want to protect those patches as they are, stop the weeds from spreading, and then hopefully that will be maintained into the long run. Like a lot of dairy farms, there's also some really weedy gullies on this farm. We've got blackberry, we've got hawthorn, and we want to try and stop that spreading any further, and also improve that, the water quality in the gullies. Shelter belts. Obviously, shelter belts are a win-win for everyone. Patches over the back here, there is strong southerly predominant winds, no vegetation on that side of the farm, so we're looking at an opportunity to put some shelter belts in. We're thinking maybe partially permanent biodiverse shelter belts, maybe some plantation species, thinking about diverse species, diverse income streams, thinking about carbon and opportunities around carbon credits versus biodiversity credits. So yeah, we're doing all sorts of different bits and pieces over the next couple of years, and then at the end of the project, just before June 2028, we're actually going to revisit the data and see if we've seen a certified uptick in the vegetation condition at the end of this project, which could actually provide an opportunity for biodiversity credit. So that is through the Accounting for Nature methodology. So we've done the baseline account already. It's a registered account, and then that means that TIA or the already given owner of that account can then report on that. Sorry. So yeah, that's it. Basically, in a nutshell, here's an example. Yeah, we're going to look after the vegetation. I'm going to leave it at that. But feel free to come and talk to Tom and Isabella and I. We've got a table at the back. We've finally produced some information that we can sort of articulate what we're doing here now that we've got a plan. and it will evolve over the next few years. So come and have a chat to us. Thanks very much.
So I thought I might just set the scene to start with a little bit and then hand over to the panel with a few questions. But Symon sort of touched on this a little bit around what's been happening with the benchmarking data, and I thought it'd be putting context about maybe this session here is about how's our farming systems adjusted over the last 10 years and what can we expect in the next 10 years. So can we get an insight by looking back? Can we actually forecast what that looks like, and then to maybe ask what are the key R&D needs that we need to address and support grabbing those opportunities or facing into those challenges. If we look at it over the last 10 years, and I've just averaged as a 3-year rolling average, so take the average of 3 years and move that forward, our production per cow hasn't really changed that much. So as an average across the industry, we're sitting around 440 kilos of milk solids, and you can see that in that graph. I won't go through each graph for this. Production per hectare, on the other hand, has gone up by about 200 kilos of milk solids. So that certainly suggests that we've intensified our milking hectares with more cows, but we haven't really driven the per cow performance that high. I would have thought that that would have been coupled with a higher pasture consumption per hectare, but we haven't really moved that far. We've only moved to 0.4 of a tonne. So 0.4 of a tonne probably gives you about 40 kilos of milk solids on that 10-to-1 conversion efficiency. So that represents about 20% of that extra that we've seen per hectare. So it suggests that about 80% or 75% to 80% of that extra production is being reliant on supplementary feed, whether purchased fodder or purchased grain. And we've seen that in a reduction in terms of our homegrown feed as a percentage of the diet, coming back from 68% to 61%. So as we've become more intensive with more cows to the milking hectares, we know the story about bigger farms. We've seen the size of the herd increase. But have we got better at growing our feed, and have we got better at converting that feed into milk? It probably suggests that we've plateaued a little bit, and we've certainly seen that in the feed costs. So my questions to the panel are, have we addressed some of our comparative advantages well enough? What's limiting that? What have we seen in those 10 years as your major changes, and then what looking forward? So I might start to my right on the first bit. So to Gavin and Luke, could you just take probably a few minutes to introduce yourself and a bit of background, but then reflect on what's changed in those last 10 years and what you've seen on your farms and the farms that you've operated, and what do you think some of the most significant changes have been? So I might start with you, Luke, if that's okay. If you could kick us off, that'd be great.
Yeah, in the last 10 years, I sort of started thinking about it and, think about what's happened. You think, oh, nothing much has changed, but it has. It has changed in Tasmania, the dairy industry. As you say, the farm size, the herd size has grown, probably from 300 to 500 cows in the last 10 years, somewhere around those figures. The change in that, probably 10 years ago, or definitely 20 years ago, this farm would be filled full of, this room would be filled full of farmer owners. Today, it's with a lot of corporate farm ownership, so we're addressing a lot of managers and things like that now, more so than farm owners. A few things have probably changed in the way we feed cows now. One of those things I think is from farm, with the corporates, they've probably valued their labour and the time spent on farm. As a family farm, you really didn't value your own labour at all, whereas they've done that. So we've changed the way we've farmed in valuing the labour. Things like fodder crops. We used to grow a lot of fodder crops. We're not growing the fodder crops that we used to grow, and maybe that's because of the labour that actually went into that fodder crop that we are now valuing. I think there's a lot of learnings from that with things like halter and things like that. Like that's a game changer, and will we see those fodder crops come back as there's less labour to go put up a reel in a paddock, things like that. I can see us changing that. The last 10 years, 15 years ago, say, we didn't even know what a social licence was as a dairy industry. In the last 10 years, we've definitely learnt about that, and we've put a high value on that. And, we've last 10 years, we've phased out inductions. We've done a really good job of phasing out inductions. The industry's developed there. We're increasing the use of probably sex semen and beef, dairy beef is a big change. And yeah, so second part of the question was probably what do we want going forward? Or
Oh, no, that's good. That's a good summary. Just a little bit about your farm and what you've done in the last 10 years in your
yeah,
farm.
right, yeah. Anyway, so that's my answer to that one. But yeah, so Luke McNabb, dairy farmer down at Rocky Cape. I also sit on the Dairy Tas board. Yeah, our farm's changed in the last 10 years. We've actually implemented robots about 11 years ago now on our farm, but driving efficiencies with, back to efficiencies with labour, which we've probably learnt from our corporate counterparts. I think every family farm is doing the same. We're learning from that, and we're putting that in place. So yeah, everything to do with efficiency is what I'm probably all about, driving efficiency, irrigation, you know, everything really.
No, it's good. No, thanks, Luke. And hand over to Gavin. Gavin, yeah, if you could maybe reflect on your journey in dairy and particularly the last 10 years of what you've seen, some of the major changes as Luke's done, that'd be great.
Yeah, Gavin Beaumont from Prime Dairy. I've been here for 3.5 years. I was told this is the best dairy area in the world, and I arrived to 3 years of drought. So I suppose it's best to learn from the tough times and deal with it as we go. First impressions, first of all, we've got 10 dairy farms and 2 in the mainland, and quite a few staff to manage around that, so it's pretty complex and diverse what we have to deal with because there's different farms. First impression is these farms change ownership a lot, so I think the consistency in building a result year on year was under pressure, and you can see it even on today's graphs where they've made improvements on this farm, and you sort of improve 5 to 10% every year. You can't make that jump of 30% in one shot. So that's what we're trying to do, is just have a steady, consistent, reliable improvement in all aspects, right through all your cost structure and your production. It does make it difficult when your rainfall falls at the wrong times of the year, and you need to make a plan. But I think if you know next year you're going to be on the same farm, you can plan for that. And it's the same all over the world. It's not just here. You have to mitigate risk and think about things in the future. Yeah, and then like the costs just come at you really fast, vet med and like labour, and then obviously you're buying in feed if you haven't planned for that. That is something that you get to sort of your autumn to June part of the financial year, and it just can blow out if you're not ready for it. Yeah, and then yeah, what else on the on the pasture side? You know, I think it's just keeping it simple and keeping your ryegrass as your business is a really, really good moderate climate area for ryegrass. So if that can form the base of your fodder reserve, you might not be growing 20 tonnes, but even if it's a consistent 12 or whatever, you can stock for it and plan for it. I think it's really good that they're doing 20 tonnes on some of these hectares here, but you know, realistically, we're not reaching that, and whatever the reasons are, irrigation, fertility, management, that's things that we've got to look at. And I think if there's any time spent, we must, it always comes down to pastures and growing grass. The rest sort of fits in by itself. So I think if you're sitting and wondering, what do I do next, you just go out to your pastures and try get your ryegrass going. Further than that, yeah, it's just what we do, because we could call it the corporate model. We just like to call ourselves, you know, we're here looking after the ground for this period of time, regardless if it's corporate or privately owned, and then we've just got to look after our people and make sure that they also consistent, as just as consistent as a land ownership, and you sort of grow that person and they also improve their work performance just as much as what the pastures do. So it's a combination of all of that, and just probably quietly getting on with your own business and just pushing out a result so that you can be around next year. And I think the last thing is just there's a potential out there which we don't always get. So just looking for that potential to improve all the time and just going for it, because I think there's a potential out there which, because of this inconsistent maybe land ownership or production and seasonals, if we can just be a bit more consistent and get that improvement year on year, we'll do well. And I think that's the secret in what we're trying to do.
Yeah, very good. Thank you, Gavin. I might hand over now to the left-hand side and start with you, Meg, and then flick over to Sam. But if you both could sort of just provide a bit of background about your role within the industry, what you're up to at the moment, and I think we'll probably look more forward. So for the next 10 years, what do you sort of see as some of the major opportunities for particularly Tasmanian dairy industry, but what are some of the challenges that we have to foresee as well and lean into, and what role can we play as a supporting institute across RD&E to support some of those things? So I'll start with you, Meg, and then I'll throw over to Sam.
Hi, I'm Meg Lawrence. We have a family farm near Westbury. I have been home on the farm for 5-6 years now. So yeah, I guess, moving forward, we're going to have to prepare more for uncertain climate conditions and the changing seasons, and reduced reliable water availability, and probably that social license, and being aware of that and managing for it in regards to multiple things, bobby calves, and sustainability and all that kind of thing with fertiliser use and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, they're good, and you obviously the role within the farm, you're thinking about those things. Has been things you started to take on already, or?
So I'm a herd manager currently on farm, and then for us personally, we've started succession planning. There's 5 of us kids, so working through how that's all going to work in the future.
That's great, Meg. Good stuff. And Sam, could you just give a bit of a background of what's involved with your position and some of the things that you see are happening on farm at the moment, but also, what do you see coming in the next 10 years from there? Yep.
Thank you, Richard. Yeah, so I've been in the industry now for, over 12 years. So working for TIA initially as an extension officer doing dairy extension, and now for Fonterra, working in a role as an area manager looking after our suppliers and doing the paddock role. I guess over my time I have observed a few things and what works well and I guess areas for improvement. I think for me the way farmers I think have really settled into their system, knowing it, and setting that up for their land, the skill set on farm and the people that are around them, I think that's a real strength, and just shows through whether you're high import, low import, that I think really is a thing that adds to the success of those farms. But I think going forward, going to what Meg mentioned around, sustainability, I do think that's forever growing, and, the word environment, sometimes we kind of can cringe at it, but, people looking to soils in particular, how do we look at soils and the microbiology and doing things less, less synthetically, and kind of leaning towards the natural way that the system works, and how do we lean in on, the advantages that can have for our pasture growth. So I think that's probably something that, going forward, more research in the soil microbiology and more of a focus to try and reduce things like nitrogen and improve that figure. I guess what is concerning for me is that, that homegrown feed diet has come back, and I think we've talked about that question of, have we made incremental, improvements in the pasture space, and I do think that we just need to have a renewed focus consistently on upskilling the people on the ground, because it's easy to have that knowledge with the farm owners and then see those farm owners sit back and let the younger generations lead, but unless we're renewing that training and keeping them up to speed with pasture management and the basics, then I just worry that maybe we lose a little bit of a focus.
No, that's great, and probably a good segue in. So if you could hand to Rory, and Rory, I know you can talk a little bit about your role at Dairy Australia, but probably a bit of a harder one. If you look at Dairy Australia's investments over the last 10 years, what do you feel has sort of delivered to the major impacts and helped the industry along, and what do you see as the priorities for that R&D investment? And I know it's a pretty challenging one given the diversity of farming systems that exist across Australia and the shrinking milk pool, but be really keen to get your insights in terms of how DA's prioritised part of that over the last 10 years and what you see going forward.
Yeah, so I think it's a good question, Richard. Obviously, there's been a large amount of varied research investments over the last couple of decades now. We've had a lot of focus on medium and shorter term and longer term projects with varying levels of success, you would say, and that's always going to be the case with research. You're not going to have absolute winners and bankers all the time. There's been a fairly significant focus, certainly within Agriculture Victoria, and a lot of major investment there on animal and pasture genetics. Sometimes that type of work takes quite a while to come through to fruition on farm, and that's probably been the case. Ellenbank Research Institute has become the primary dairy research facility in the country, and that wasn't by accident either. That was a decision of collectively the state governments over a decade ago. And we've had a lot of nutrition, pasture-based nutrition work. There's been some good work on heat stress tolerance and improvements in milk output per cow and things like that. I think the facility here at Elliott in Tasmania has a big role to play going forward with the they've created a niche for themselves as the systems research institute that has a real kind of point of difference from a lot of the other institutes that are funded by Dairy Australia around the country. And then going more north, we have obviously quite different systems in New South Wales and Queensland, and probably more total mixed ration, partial mixed ration type R&D focus on there. So it is quite challenging for Dairy Australia to invest across that whole spectrum. I think in the longer term, over the next decade, the Dairy Australia strategic plan, I'm not sure if it's released today or this week, it's pretty close anyway to being formally released over the next 5 or 7 years or whatever, and that has a number of key metrics that are kind of called out very specifically. One of them is to drive profitable dairy farm systems across the country, and I think your slide up there provides some insight into the challenges that we're going to face in that area. And then from the point of view of homegrown feed in particular, there's a specific metric to lift homegrown feed utilisation across all dairy farms by around 1 tonne per hectare between now and 2030. So whilst there's a big kind of, and Tasmania probably, to be fair, is leading the pack, as Symon presented the results earlier, some really good data showing, one of the things that stuck out for me from Symon's presentation was that the top 25% getting that extra 2 tonnes per hectare at 12 tonnes versus 10. So I think there's opportunity there for the rest of the industry here to really continue to drive that on through improved pasture utilisation, improved pasture management basics. There are probably no real silver bullets out there, and research is unlikely to provide them. The team here at Elliott has shown what's achievable with some high stocking rates and really good quality pasture management and good quality soil, fertility, all those type of things that are, we've been talking about for a long time now. So I think that's going to be the emphasis going forward, to try and really improve on that, and then keep an eye on the sustainability challenge as well. I thought one of the things that I thought was interesting from your slide was the increase in milk solids production per hectare has been if I'm not interpreting your slide correctly, essentially almost all driven by supplementary feed as opposed to homegrown feed. And I think, you know, we need to be careful that we don't erode competitiveness in the industry here, and you know that's going to result in a higher cost of production, which is also something that you've presented on your slide. So whilst we have, you know, I think it's important for individual farmers to make sure that the milk that's been produced on the farm, the extra milk, if you do intensify, is as profitable as it can possibly be, and the best way to achieve that is through improvements and increases in pasture utilization, as opposed to probably supplementary feed. The litre you get from an extra kilo of grazed pasture is going to be a lot more profitable than bought-in feed, and I think that's something we need to keep reinforcing that, I think.
We've seen farming systems diversify, particularly here in Australia, and if we compare that to, you know, probably Ireland and New Zealand, which are very much pasture-based, Tasmania's a little bit more aligned to them, but how do we capture the learnings from those areas where there's quite a large investment? You look at the size of those industries and the messages they put out, but also what is the opportunity for us to learn from some of the more intensive systems that we're doing in Australia at the moment? You talked on what you've seen in Queensland and New South Wales. We in Tassie sort of sit as halfway in between. You know, we have got some farms that have intensified quite a bit and leaning a little bit more towards our systems as well. We've seen installation of loafing areas and the like. How do we capture the both benefits out of you know, what we see out of Ireland and New Zealand around our grass systems, but what are some of the learnings we can get from the more intensive work that's been done? I think, you know, Tassie's in a pretty fortunate position to do that, but it's hard, so how do you prioritise as well? So, did you have a comment on that, Sam?
Yeah, I guess back to my comment earlier, I think, you know, the lower input systems, you know, the real positive to those that I see is the simplicity and the just doing things well, you know, keeping it to the basics, and it goes a long way. And I think that comes back to, you know, their focus on pastures, because you're relying on it and it's what makes you the money at the end of the day. I think then on the other end, the higher input is that I think where you really make gains there is the scale and, you know, cost control and trying to get, you know, every last dollar out of, you know, what you do. But it's a balance, and, you know, I think equally you can go too far one way and, you know, quality of pasture comes into it, and you know, not having that substitution where, you know, you're putting in extra grain and extra supplement for the sake of it and not maximising what you're growing and not actually utilising it. I think that's, yeah, where my head goes to, of that balance. You know, I think both systems do things well. It's just how do you, incorporate.
And Rory, how's DA managing that? I know obviously it's tough because you've got such diversity of systems, but are you trying to tap into some of that shared knowledge? And
look, going back to your original question, we have a national forage strategy that's currently in place and being developed to look at, try and really target the research investments in feed base in general and farm system profitability in general, and we have looked heavily at trying to get collaboration across the research institutes, both within Australia and beyond. I think we need to, the research community globally is too small now. It's shrunk a lot. People mightn't realise this over the last 20 or 30 years, and there's probably less public money globally than ever before being spent on R&D, which is not a great thing from a dairy farm and productivity point of view. So we do need to be more efficient in how we share knowledge and how we, you know, there's a lot of stuff that comes from, obviously, you know, trained in Ireland and in dairy farming system knowledge and in New Zealand and indeed in the USA for those more intensive systems. And, you know, Dairy Australia is very conscious of trying to bring that knowledge back into Australia. I think from a Tasmanian pasture, you know, at an individual farm, that's at an industry level, but at an individual farm level then, if you're looking at intensifying, I'd really, like, if you're a 300 cow farm and you're moving to 350 cows or 400, you've got to ask, where is that extra feed for those 50 cows coming from? Is it through improvements in pasture utilisation, more land being acquired, or is it simply from more bought in feed? Because there will be big differences in profit at a marginal level between them. And I think every farm, as Sam says, knows their system inside out in most cases, but at an industry level we need to keep reinforcing those basic kind of profit drivers at farm level, and it's the farm system profit drivers instead of partial marginal or incomplete marginal analysis factors that may not give the whole picture of farm profit. So I think that's something that farmers should always have front of mind when look at. Don't just get bigger for the sake of it. You should be more profitable if you're improving.
Just a quick comment to add, and not getting caught in your system and treating every year differently. And like the graphs that Peter had up before really highlighted that, obviously the seasons are very different and aren't the same. And so what I have observed is like lower input systems, capping themselves, I can't go up, that's where my grain sits and that's where the system sits. But on the other hand, you've got cows that are, maybe losing condition or, you're going backwards. So I think just being mindful that you're catering.
Managing the situation, yeah.
Yeah, situation.
Yeah. I might jump to you, Meg, and then go over to Gavin and Luke as well. But if we look at Tasmania's ambition for agriculture, it's to grow it to $10 billion by 2050. So that's about a 6-7% per annum increase, and dairy is our largest sector. We've seen a fair bit of growth over the last 10 years, but it's sort of plateaued a little bit in the last 3 as well. So where do we get that 6 or 7% growth? Is that going to come from us with extra farms? Are we going to get more milk? And if we encourage the, I suppose, investment in dairy, are we going to get paid more for that milk, or are we actually going to get more value for that milk? It's a tough one, isn't it? Where's that 6 or 7% come from? How much comes from growth and how much comes from value? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think there's room for growth, but ideally it would increase in value, whether that'll happen or not. I guess with the increasing technology and stuff like that, it's, like things like Halter, like allowing people to increase pasture utilisation, genomics, like increasing herd productivity and all that kind of thing is probably where possible gains might come.
Yep. And then has your business been growing over the last 10 years? You've seen the growth within your farm?
So we've probably been stable-ish numbers for the last 10 years, but our productivity, cow production has increased a fair bit. We changed to a biological system about 10 years ago. So we've reduced fertiliser or synthetic fertiliser application, still getting pretty good pasture production and cow production. So,
That's great. Thanks, Meg. So we'll throw over to the right for the last couple of minutes. And Gavin, where do you see some of that growth coming? Like that's pretty significant growth, 6-7% per year. Do you see that coming from additional farms or from the existing farm base?
Yeah, I don't think it's from conversions and going over because you're taking away from somewhere else unless it's unproductive. I think it's just making series of good decisions on your farm and the difference between your good and bad, which is if you take the difference between your best cow and your worst cow, find that worst 10%, deal with it. Same with your best and worst pastures. Find your worst pasture, 10% pastures, fix that, and that will contribute to your farm's efficiency. Yep. So just knowing what you're dealing with and working with that, not necessarily growing fast and adding on hectares.
Yeah. No, very good. And Luke, I think it's fair to get the last word, being Chair of Dairy Tas, and where you see Dairy Tas' strategic priorities and support to the industry around that sort of longer term growth targets.
We're going to get paid more for our milk. Anyway, well, yeah, we're not growing. Yeah, we're not seeing that big growth. I don't think we're not seeing it, and we're probably not going to see it. As far as like Gavin said, you know, every farm's improving. It's important for every farm to benchmark against themselves, not just industry or the top 25%. Every business should benchmark against their own financials and that. Another thing no one sort of talks about, we talk about return on asset, but there's another thing that's it's return on your time as well, and whether that's an investor or whether that's you know, someone on the ground milking the cows. I think there needs to be it's return on time, and we want sustainable farms. We want employees to be staying on farm, managers and everything, and staying there and building them. And with people staying on a farm, profitability will increase as well, because those people, they understand why we did this last year, and they slowly grow. So that's a really important thing. Whether it's going to grow to the state's expectations or not, I don't know. No, get paid more. That'll be easy.
Very good. All right, well, we'll leave it on that. I think that's our time, Alison, for the thing. And so I'm standing between people and lunch, so I'll call it quits. Please put your hands together for the panel.